The alien expedition had been searching for centuries. Legends spoke of an ancient race that once ruled the stars, a species so powerful that entire empires trembled before them. But they were gone now, wiped out in a war so destructive that even their name was spoken only in whispers. Draxor, the lead scientist of the excavation team, stood at the edge of a massive crater. His 4 golden eyes scanned the ruins below. The planet had been dead for thousands of years, its surface covered in ash and silent wreckage. The sky was dark, filled with floating debris, the remains of once great cities now reduced to dust. The other researchers moved carefully, scanning the ground with energy sensors. There was no life here, no sign of movement, just ruins, just history, or so they thought. "Commander," a voice crackled over Draxor's communicator. It was one of the scouts. "We found something unusual." Draxor's long, clawed fingers tapped at his wrist device. "Report." The scout hesitated. "It's a vault, sir. A massive underground structure. The doors are still sealed." Draxor frowned. That was impossible. A sealed vault. After all these years, the radiation storms alone should have eroded anything left standing. "Send me the coordinates," he ordered. A few minutes later, Draxor arrived at the site with his team. The structure was half buried in the ground, its metal walls covered in dust and strange symbols. Unlike the ruins above, this place had survived untouched. The doors were enormous, made of a strange alloy that their scanners couldn't penetrate. Then he saw the inscription. A warning. Do NOTENTR. Do NOTDOAK them. The words were carved deep into the metal. Their edges burned black. The language was ancient, but unmistakable. It was human. A chill ran through the group. The younger researchers shifted nervously, their tails flicking in agitation. Even the soldiers tightened their grips on their weapons. One of the junior scientists, Creel, whispered, "Maybe we should leave it alone." Draxor turned to face him. "Don't be ridiculous. We have uncovered something no one else has. This could be the greatest discovery in history." "But sir," Creel insisted, "what if the warning is real? What if there's something dangerous inside?" Draxor's eyes narrowed. "Do you truly believe in ghost stories?" He turned to the engineers. "Prepare the cutting tools. We're opening this vault." The team hesitated but obeyed. Plasma torches flared to life, cutting through the ancient metal with precision. Sparks flew, and the air filled with the scent of burning alloy. The door resisted longer than expected, as if something inside didn't want to be disturbed. Then, with a deep groan, the vault doors slid open. A cold wind rushed out, carrying the scent of metal and decay. The air was thick, heavy, as if the very space inside had been holding its breath. Darkness. The interior of the vault was vast, stretching far beyond the reach of their lights. Strange structures lined the walls. Machines, containers, and rows of something. The soldiers stepped forward cautiously, their weapons raised. Draxor activated his helmet's enhanced vision. His heart pounded. Then, suddenly, the lights came on. Not their lights. The vault's. A deep mechanical hum filled the air. Ancient systems reactivated, displays flickering to life. Red warning symbols flashed across the walls in languages long forgotten. Something had been triggered. Then they saw them. Rows upon rows of pods. Tall metallic capsules lined the chamber, each one covered in frost. Inside each pod was a figure, a humanoid shape, motionless, frozen in time. One of the researchers gasped. "Are they alive?" Draxor took a cautious step forward, wiping the frost from one of the pods. His breath caught in his throat. Inside, a human stared back at him. Its eyes were closed, its face calm. But something about it was wrong. The body was covered in strange markings, glowing faintly beneath the frost. The hair was white, the skin pale. And then, the worst part. The heart monitor inside the pod began to beep. slow at first, then faster. And then, the human opened its eyes. A terrible silence filled the vault. The human's gaze was unfocused at first, but then it locked onto Draxor. And it smiled. Panic erupted. Soldiers raised their weapons. Alarms blared. The pods around them began to open. Draxor stumbled backward. Seal the vault. Now. But it was too late. The humans were waking up. And the galaxy would never be the same. The vault was no longer silent. Alarms blared, echoing through the massive underground chamber. The once dormant machinery hummed to life, flashing symbols and warnings in 100 forgotten languages. The researchers stumbled back, their eyes locked on the pods as the ice began to melt. Draxor's mind raced. This wasn't supposed to happen. The vault had been sealed for centuries. There was no way anything inside could still be alive. And yet, the human in front of him was awake. It didn't move right away. Its glowing blue eyes flickered as if adjusting to the light. The markings on its skin pulsed faintly, strange symbols running along its arms like living energy. It blinked once, twice. Then, slowly, it turned its head. It was watching them now. A researcher gasped. A soldier cursed under his breath. Draxor forced himself to stay calm. He had studied ancient humans, read the fragmented records left behind. This species had been feared for their violence, their ability to wage war like no other. But these humans were supposed to be extinct. Long gone. Then why did this one look so unconcerned? The human's gaze flickered to the soldiers aiming their weapons at it. It didn't react with fear. It didn't speak. It just smiled. A slow, unsettling grin, as if this was all just an amusing game. Then another pod opened. A second human. Then a third. A fourth. More and more, the frost-covered figures emerged, blinking against the light, stretching stiff limbs, shaking off centuries of sleep. The air grew thick with an electric charge. Draxor took a slow step back. This was bad. One of the soldiers panicked. "Weapons free," he shouted. The first shot rang out. A bolt of plasma streaked across the vault, aimed directly at the smiling human. It should have been an instant kill. The energy should have burned through flesh and bone, ending this nightmare before it began. But the bolt never hit. The human moved. No, it didn't just move. It disappeared. One moment it was there, standing in front of them. The next, it was gone. The plasma bolt struck the wall, exploding in a shower of sparks. The soldiers froze, scanning the area, their weapons shaking. Then, a whisper. Right behind them. Too slow. The soldier barely had time to turn. A blur of motion. A sickening crack. And then, silence. The soldier's body hit the ground. Lifeless. Panic erupted. The researchers scrambled for cover. The soldiers fired wildly, but their shots found nothing but air. The humans moved too fast. One by one, the awakened figures flickered in and out of sight, vanishing and reappearing like ghosts. This wasn't a battle. It was a massacre. Draxor could only watch in horror as the humans tore through his team. One lifted a soldier with a single hand, staring at him as if studying an insect. Then, with terrifying ease, it crushed his skull. Another ripped a weapon from a researcher's grip, examining the alien technology for only a second before casually snapping it in half. And all the while, they were smiling. They weren't just awake. They were enjoying this. Draxor's breathing was ragged. He had to get out. He had to escape. He turned, sprinting for the exit. The hallway was just ahead. If he could reach it, if he could warn the fleet. A figure appeared in front of him. The first human. Its glowing eyes locked onto his. Draxor skidded to a stop, his claws scraping against the metal floor. His body trembled. His heart pounded. The human tilted its head. It didn't seem angry. Didn't seem hostile. If anything, it looked amused. It took a slow step forward. Then it spoke. "Why did you wake us?" The voice was deep, cold, dangerous. Draxor tried to answer, but his throat had closed up. He could only shake his head, his mind screaming at him to run. The human's smile widened. "You shouldn't have done that." Then everything went dark. Draxor awoke to silence. For a moment, he didn't remember where he was. His head throbbed, his vision blurred. Cold metal pressed against his back. His breathing was ragged, his body aching. Then it hit him. The vault. The humans. His eyes shot open. The chamber was unrecognizable. Bodies littered the floor. His soldiers, his researchers, all of them dead or missing. The overhead lights flickered, casting eerie shadows along the walls. Blood, too much of it, stained the metal. The air was thick with the scent of ozone, and something far worse. But the humans were gone. Draxor pushed himself up, his hands shaking. He checked his communicator. No signal. The entire vault's systems had been wiped out. He was alone. Or so he thought. A soft hum vibrated through the floor. Not the familiar hum of the vault's machinery. No, this was something else. Something ancient. His eyes darted to the massive doors at the far end of the chamber. They had been sealed for centuries. No force had ever been able to breach them. But now, they were open. Draxor's breath caught in his throat. He knew what lay beyond those doors. The final chamber. The one they were never supposed to enter. His claws twitched. He had two choices: run for his ship and escape, leave this nightmare behind, or step into the unknown. He already knew what the humans would do. They had entered that chamber. Draxor swallowed hard. He had to follow. Step by step, he made his way forward. Past the wreckage, past the bodies, past the melted weapons and twisted metal. The doors loomed over him like the mouth of some great beast, swallowing all light beyond its threshold. Inside, the air was different. Colder, charged. The chamber was enormous, stretching endlessly in all directions. At its center stood a monolith, towering, glowing with unreadable symbols, pulsing with raw energy. It was ancient, far older than the war, older than his own species. And at its base, the humans were waiting. Draxor froze. There were more of them now, hundreds, all standing silently, their glowing eyes locked onto the monolith. They didn't turn to look at him. They didn't need to. They had felt his presence. One of them, the first one he had seen, stepped forward. It didn't smile this time. "You really don't understand, do you?" the human said softly. Draxor swallowed. Understand? What? The human raised a hand and touched the monolith. The symbols flared, spreading across its body, lighting up the chamber in an eerie blue glow. "Your people thought we were gone," the human whispered. A deep rumble filled the air. The monolith was waking up. "You thought the war ended." The ground beneath them shook. "You thought you won." Draxor's blood ran cold. The human finally turned to face him. Its expression was no longer amused. It was something far worse. It was pity. "You don't realize it yet, but you've already lost." Then the chamber exploded with light. The chamber pulsed with energy. The monolith's symbols blazed like burning stars, their glow reflected in the cold, unblinking eyes of the humans. Draxor's instincts screamed at him to run. Every fiber of his being told him that something terrible was happening. But he was frozen. The air around him felt thick, heavy, alive. The monolith trembled, and then it spoke. Not with words, not with sound. With raw force. A shockwave blasted outward. Draxor was thrown back, crashing against the cold metal floor. His body burned with pain, his vision flickering. The human stood unharmed. Then the whispers began. Not from the humans, not from the monolith. From the air itself. A deep guttural voice echoed in his mind. Awakening. Complete. Draxor gasped, his claws digging into the floor. This wasn't possible. They had destroyed everything human. Every last remnant of their empire. every soldier, every world. How? How were they still here? The lead human turned toward him, stepping forward slowly. The glowing symbols on his body pulsed in sync with the monolith. "You don't understand what you've done," the human said. His voice was calm, too calm. Draxur forced himself up. His legs were weak, shaking. "We wiped you out. Your species was eradicated." The human tilted his head. "You killed what you could see, what you could touch." The monolith flared. "But you never killed us." Draxur's breathing quickened. He turned toward the doors. He had to get out. Now. The moment his claws scraped against the floor, the chamber shifted. The walls darkened. The metal around him melted away into something black, endless, consuming. The doors that led him in were gone. There was no escape. Draxur's heart pounded in his chest. What is this?" The human smiled. "This." The glow in his eyes deepened. "This is what you tried to destroy." The other humans, hundreds of them, turned in unison. Their eyes flashed with unnatural light. Draxur stepped back. He never felt fear like this before. He had faced wars, planetary invasions, death itself. But this was something else. "This is what happens," the human said, "when you wake us up." A deep rumble shook the chamber again. But this time, it didn't stop. The monolith's glow pulsed, pulsed, pulsed. The air crackled with power. And then, the entire vault collapsed into darkness. Darkness swallowed everything. Draxur felt weightless, trapped in a void where no light existed. His body screamed for something, anything, to anchor him. But there was nothing. Just the cold. And the voices. They whispered in a language older than the stars, in tones that carried the weight of forgotten empires. He tried to move, but his body refused to obey. He wasn't in control anymore. Then, the world snapped back into existence. A violent jolt sent him crashing to the ground. He gasped, claws scraping against the cold metal floor. The chamber was still there, but it had changed. The walls pulsed as if alive. The monolith was no longer just an ancient relic. It was awake. The humans stood before him, unmoved, unshaken. Their glowing eyes stared down at him like gods judging a mortal. The lead human spoke. "Now you understand." Draxur's breathing was ragged. His mind fought against the impossible truth, but the answer was clear. They had never wiped out humanity. They had only buried it. And now, these humans, whatever they had become, were rising. A deep hum resonated through the chamber. The symbols on the monolith shifted, forming new patterns. Something was coming. Draxur's instincts screamed at him to run, to escape, to warn the Dominion. He turned toward the door, except there was no door. The walls of the chamber had sealed shut. The human stepped closer. His voice was low, steady. "You thought you won. You thought we were gone." A pause. "But we are not like you." The ground trembled. Draxur's scales bristled. Something huge was shifting beneath them, a force unlike anything he had ever felt. He clenched his jaw. "What are you?" The human smiled. "Humanity." The monolith flared. The entire station shook. And then, a massive shockwave exploded outward. Draxur was thrown back. His vision blurred, but he saw it, the walls of the station breaking apart. Outside, in the vastness of space, something was moving. Not a fleet, not an army. Something worse. Draxur's blood ran cold. The Dominion had waged war for centuries. They had fought countless species, conquered thousands of worlds. But this was not a war. This was a reckoning. The human crouched beside him, eyes glowing with the same energy that now pulsed through the station. "You wanted us gone." He leaned in. "But we were only sleeping." Draxur's heart pounded in his chest. The walls cracked. The ceiling groaned. The entire station was coming apart. He had to get out. He had to warn the Dominion. But deep inside, he knew. It was already too late. They had woken something they could never put back to sleep. The walls screamed as the ancient station tore itself apart. Draxor clawed at the floor, forcing himself up as the entire chamber shook violently. The monolith at the center pulsed, its dark surface now fully awake, alive. And outside the station, in the infinite void of space, something moved. Something impossibly large. Draxor's heart slammed against his chest. The Dominion High Command had always mocked the old warnings, dismissing them as nothing more than myths. Humanity was gone, they said, extinct, weak. But now, as he stared into the abyss beyond the shattered walls of the station, he knew the truth. They had never been gone. They had only been waiting. A deafening boom echoed through the station. The gravity shifted, pulling him sideways. Something massive was drawing them in. Draxor struggled to regain control, his claws gripping the metal floor. His body fought against the force, but it was no use. He was being dragged toward the breach. The lead human, standing effortlessly against the pull, watched him with glowing eyes. "You feel it, don't you?" Draxor bared his fangs. "What is this?" The human didn't answer. Instead, he stepped forward and extended a hand. Draxor hesitated. The Dominion had crushed countless civilizations, erased entire species, but he had never felt fear like this. Not until now. The force intensified. The station's remains were no longer floating. They were being devoured. Draxor turned his gaze outside. And there, beyond the ruins of the station, he saw it. The ship. No, not a ship. A Titan. It was larger than anything the Dominion had ever built, larger than any war vessel recorded in history. It didn't glow with energy. It absorbed it. And it was alive. Draxor's mind rebelled against the sight. The station was breaking apart, and yet the ship pulled every piece toward itself, consuming it like a predator feeding on its prey. This wasn't technology. This was something beyond understanding. A voice, deep, resonating, ancient, whispered through the station. It wasn't coming from the humans. It was coming from the ship itself. Draxor's claws trembled. His instincts screamed at him to escape, to survive. But there was nowhere to run. The human's voice broke through the chaos. "This is your last chance." Draxor looked back at him. The Dominion never surrendered, never begged. But this was no ordinary enemy. This was the end of the war before it even began. The station collapsed. A final, earth-shattering explosion ripped it apart. Draxor felt himself being pulled into the abyss. The ship's gravitational field was unstoppable. He was going to be consumed. But just as he was about to be lost in the void, a hand grabbed his wrist. The human had caught him. Draxor's eyes widened. He had expected cruelty, vengeance, death. Instead, the human only whispered one sentence. "You will carry the message." And then, everything went dark. Draxor gasped as his body lurched forward. His claws scraped against the metal surface beneath him. He was breathing. He was alive. His mind struggled to process what had happened. One moment, he had been on the verge of destruction. The next, he was here, somewhere else. The ship, the nightmare. It had consumed the station, taken everything. But why had it spared him? He forced himself to his feet, ignoring the sharp pain in his limbs. The room was dark, not just unlit. It absorbed light, swallowed it, twisted it. A voice echoed through the void. "You were chosen." Draxor turned sharply. The human stood there, watching him. No helmet, no weapons, just those piercing, knowing eyes. "Why?" Draxor's voice was hoarse, filled with the weight of everything he had just seen. "Why let me live?" The human stepped forward. The walls pulsed. The ship was alive, watching, listening. "Because you will tell them." Draxor bared his fangs. Tell them what? The human didn't answer immediately. Instead, he looked past Draxor into the abyss beyond the viewing window. The stars seemed different here, distant, afraid. Then the truth hit him. The Dominion's greatest war station had been annihilated without a single shot fired. Their ships had been crushed, not by weapons, but by something far worse. A force beyond their understanding. Draxor swallowed hard. The Dominion had mocked the warnings, dismissed the ancient fear of humans as myths. But now, they would know the truth. They had never won. Humanity had simply been waiting. And now, the wait was over. The human placed a hand on the glass, as if reaching toward the galaxy itself. His next words sent a chill through Draxor's bones. "We remember everything." The ship lurched forward, faster than anything Draxor had ever seen, faster than the laws of physics should allow. They were heading toward Dominion space. The message was clear. The war had just begun, and this time, the Dominion wasn't the hunter. They were the prey.